One night on the 41st floor of the Reeves Tower, after the lights went out, Isaiah Brooks found an empty cake box on a young woman's desk. A $3.99 box from the grocery on Edgewood, the cardboard still soft where the frosting had been. Somebody had eaten her cake and left her the box. In 11 years cleaning that floor, only 3 people had ever learned his name, and he didn't know a camera had been running, or that the man who owned all 41 floors hadn't slept a full night in years. In 11 days, that man would sit alone behind a locked door and watch the tape 3 times over. And what he saw a janitor do for a stranger pulled loose a debt 41 years old. Isaiah looked at it for a while. Then he set his cart down and got to work. He was 64 years old, and he had been cleaning buildings since he was 23. Before the tower, it was a hospital out on the west side, and before that a school, and before that the loading floor of a warehouse that no longer stood. His mother had come up from Macon in 1962 with 2 suitcases and a cast-iron skillet wrapped in a church dress, and she raised 4 children on the wages of women whose names the city never bothered to spell right. She used to say a thing to Isaiah when he was small and the work was hard and the thanks were thin. He could still hear it in her voice, which had a little gravel in it from 40 years of other people's kitchens. "You don't feed a man so he'll remember you," she said. "You feed him so he makes it to morning." Isaiah had built a life around that sentence without ever once saying it out loud. His shift ran 8 hours and 40 minutes, and the work inside it never changed. He emptied the bins on 41 first, then rode the service elevator down 2 at a time, 37, working the odd floors one night and even the next so nothing got missed. He vacuumed the long carpets in the dark because management cut the after-hours lighting to a single band down the center of each floor to save on the bill, and he had learned the geography of every suite by the feel of the cart against the baseboards. He wiped down the glass in the elevator lobbies, where, by day, men in good suits checked their reflections and never once saw him standing 4 feet behind them. He cleaned the kitchen. He cleaned the bathrooms. He cleaned the wide marble lobby on the ground floor last, between 4:20 and 5, when the city outside was the color of wet ash and the security guard, a young man named Dante, would sometimes bring him half a sandwich. He made $14.85 an hour. After the union dues and the part the government took, it came to a little under $900 every 2 weeks. Rent on his place off Cleveland Avenue was $740 a month. The light bill ran $61 in the summer when he ran the one-window unit and $44 in the winter when he didn't. The phone was $35. What was left after that was the part Della used to call the breathing room, and it was not much room, and Isaiah had learned to breathe shallow. The math was the math. He did it in his head the way some men hum. He had a system for the work, too, built over 11 years, because a man who is paid by the hour for a job all size to a day learns to make every motion count. He did the bins first, because the bins were the thing the day crew noticed if you missed them. He saved the glass for last on each floor because his hands were freshest at the start and steadiest at the end, and glass shows everything. He kept a roll of blue tape in his hip pocket to flag the carpet stains that needed the machine. The coffee a man on 26 spilled every Monday like clockwork, the ink by the copier on 37. And he flagged them and came back with the extractor on the nights the schedule allowed, and nobody ever knew the stain had been there because by morning it wasn't. That was the whole shape of the job. When you got down to it, you made the trouble disappear so completely that the people you did it for could believe there had never been any trouble at all. You made yourself disappear the same way, into the same clean morning. It was a strange thing to be good at. He was very good at it. Some nights the work was just the work. But there was one night in October he kept folded up in himself like a card in a wallet. He had been doing the parking deck rounds at 4:50 in the morning, checking the levels the way the contract said, and on level 3 he had seen the fogged windows of a gray Corolla parked nose in against the far wall. The same Corolla that had been there at the same hour, 4 mornings running. He knew what fogged windows at 4:50 in the morning meant. He had slept in a car himself the winter Della was in the hospices, and he could not stand the quiet of the apartment. So he had gone back up and come down with a thermos cup and 2 foil squares, and he had set them on the concrete pillar by the car's bumper where the boy would find them and not have to thank anyone. And he had walked away. The next morning the cup was rinsed and set back on the pillar, upside down so the dew wouldn't fill it, with a torn corner of notebook paper underneath that said only, "Thank you, sir," in a kid's careful print. Isaiah had stood on level 3 of a parking deck at 5 in the morning and felt something move in his chest that he did not have a clean word for. He left 2 squares the next night anyway, and the night after. The boy made it to the end of the internship. Isaiah never learned which floor he worked on and never tried to. He did not drive. The truck had gone when Della got sick, sold to a man for $2,200 to cover what the insurances called the gap, which was a polite word for the part they would not pay. So he took the 49 bus to the 5 Point station and rode 2 stops and walked the last 11 minutes up Peachtree with his collar turned against whatever the night was doing. In January the walk was 38 degrees and his knees told him about every one of them. He never complained about it. There was no one left in the apartment to complain to, and a man who complains to an empty room is just rehearsing. Della had been gone 3 years and 2 months. She had been a lunch line cook at an elementary school for 19 years, and she could make a pan of cornbread that men would change their route home to drive past. Pancreas, the doctor said, by the time anybody said anything at all. 11 weeks from the word to the funeral, Isaiah had sat at her bedside at the hospice on Pryor Street and read to her from a thin Bible with a cracked spine, and when she could no longer follow the words he just kept his hand on hers and let the radio play the gospel station low, because she had told him once, early, when they were young and broke and happy, that the worst thing in the world was to die in a quiet room. So he did not let it be quiet. That was the one promise he was sure he had kept all the way to the end. After she passed, he kept doing the things she used to do. Every payday Friday he bought the cornmeal and the buttermilk, $6.30 for the both, and on Sunday after the service at the little AME church, on the corner, he made a pan of her cornbread in her skillet, the one his mother had carried up from Macon, seasoned black and smooth as riverstone. He cut it into 9 squares. He ate one at the kitchen table with the radio on the gospel station, because he had not been able to make himself turn that station off, and it was company. And he wrapped the other 8 in foil and carried them in the side pocket of his cart, 2 at a time across the week, because you never knew. On a night shift in a tower, full of people who skipped dinner to look important, who hadn't eaten since noon. This is the part nobody saw, because it happened after the lights went down. There was a security guard named Dante who studied for his GED at the front desk between rounds. And 3 nights a week a square of cornbread appeared next to his textbook with no note and no word. There was a woman on 33, a paralegal who stayed past midnight more nights than not, who one February found a foil packet on her keyboard the week her hours got cut, and she never knew who, though she suspected, and she cried at her desk about it, which she would have been ashamed to admit to anyone. He did not do it to be thanked. He would not have known what to do with the thanks. His mother had been clear on the point, and he had spent 60 years proving her right with his hands. You feed him, so he makes it to morning. The morning does not need to know who set the plate. His granddaughter was 7, and her name was Tia, and she was the only person in Atlanta who looked at Isaiah Brooks like he was the most important man in any room. Her mother, his daughter Renata, worked doubles at a nursing home in East Point for $16.20 an hour, and on the weekends Tia stayed with him, and she would sit on the kitchen floor while he made the cornbread and ask him the same question every single week, which was, "Granddaddy, how come you bring food to people who don't even know your name?" He always told her the same thing. He said, "Baby, The food don't care if they know my name. And Tia, who was 7, and therefore wiser than most, would consider this, and then ask if she could lick the bowl, and would let her every time, because there was a stretch of years coming when the world was going to teach her to stop asking for things, and he wanted her to have these Sundays to remember from before that start. He taped a scripture card to the inside lid of his cart's supply box, a little laminated card he had bought for $1 at the church table, soft now at the edges from his thumb. He did not read it every night. He just liked knowing it was there in the dark with him, riding the service elevator down through the sleeping floors of a building that did not know his name. The same way the gospel station riding low had ridden with Della at the end. A man alone on a night shift learns to keep a little company that does not require him to explain himself. There were nights it was harder than others. There were nights, usually around 3, when the building was at its most silent, and the band of after-hours lights stretched ahead of him down an empty floor like a road to nowhere, that the note being seen pressed on him like weather coming in off the water, low and heavy, and without any single thing in it you could point to. On those nights he thought about Della, who had seen him, who had been the one person on earth who looked at Isaiah Brooks and saw a whole man and not a function. He thought about the 41 years of floors he had made, shine for people who stepped on them without looking down. He was not a bitter man. Bitterness was a luxury, like the breathing room, and he could not afford much of it. But he was a tired man, some nights, in a way that sleep did not reach, and on those nights he would stop the cart and put his hand flat on the lid over the card, and breathe shallow until the weather passed over him and moved on. Then he would push off again, the one wheel pulling left, because the floors did not clean themselves, and because somewhere in the tower, most nights, there was somebody who had not eaten since noon, and that somebody was, for reasons Isaiah had stopped questioning a long time ago, his to feed. The people of the day shift moved through the tower like the building belonged to them, which, in the only way the world counted, it did. They left their coffee rings and their shredded dust document and their birthday balloons sagging by Friday. They left half-eaten lunches in the refrigerators until the smell drove Isaiah to throw them out. And then they left angry notes about the food that had gone missing. They did not see the man who emptied their bins, because there is a particular kind of person the eye is trained not to land on, and a black man past 60 in gray coveralls, pushing a cart at midnight, is at the very top of that list. He had made peace with it a long time ago. Mostly. There were nights, riding down through the dark, when the notes being seen pressed on him like weather, and on those nights he would put his hand flat on the lid of the cart over the scripture card and breathe until it passed. Then he would get back to work. Because the floors did not clean themselves, and because somewhere in the building, most nights, there was somebody who had not eaten since noon. He had no idea that the man who owned the tower had spent 41 years looking for someone exactly like him, and had given up. Malcolm Reeves had built the Reeves Group from a single leased box truck and a phone number he answered himself at any hour. And now it moved freight through 11 states, and his name was carved into the granite above the doors of the tower he had put up on the corner of Peachtree and Baker. He was 60 years old. Forbes had him at a number he never confirmed and never denied. He owned the building, the company that filled it, and a house up in Buckhead with 14 rooms he did not use. He had a son in Los Angeles he spoke to 4 times a year, and a wife who had left him in 2009 with a sentence he had never been able to argue with, which was that he treated the people closest to him like vendors he had not yet decided to renew. He had come up from a town outside Albany, Georgia, the kind of town that does not make it onto the weather map. His father picked other men's cotton on shares until the machines came, and then he picked up whatever the day offered, and one winter the day offered nothing, and the man simply stopped coming home. Malcolm's mother held the family together with 2 jobs, and a faith that Malcolm, as a boy, found unanswerable and as a man found naive. She died when he was 17. At 19, he got on a Greyhound with $31 and a paper bag of clothes and rode it north to Atlanta because somebody had told him there was work. And there was. But not the first week, and not the second. This is the part Malcolm Reeves had never told a single living soul. His third night in the city, in the January of 1985, he had nowhere to sleep, and no money left for the rooming house on Hunter Street, and it was 29 degrees, and he had walked into the lobby of an office building downtown to get out of the wind, just to stand by the warm air for a minute before the guard ran him off. There was a custodian working the lobby that night, a young black man not much older than Malcolm himself, in gray coveralls, pushing a cart. The custodian looked at him. Malcolm was 19 and proud and starving and ready to be told to leave. He had his speech ready. He did not need anything. He was just getting warm. The custodian did not run him off. The custodian looked at him for a moment. The way you look at someone and do the arithmetic and come up with the right answer. Then he kept mopping, and he said, easy, not making a thing of it, that the heating plant ran warm in the utility room on the basement level, and that the door tended to stick but wasn't locked, and that nobody came down there till the day crew at 6. He said it to the floor, not to Malcolm, so that Malcolm would not have to be a man receiving charity, only a man overhearing a fact. And then, over 2 in the morning, the custodian came down to the utility room where Malcolm was sitting against the warm pipes pretending he was fine, and, without a word, he set down a paper towel and on it 2 squares of cornbread wrapped in foil, still a little warm from somebody's sundae, and a thermos cup of coffee. Malcolm, who had eaten a pack of crackers in 2 days, who was 19 and had buried his mother and his pride in the same year, ate it with his back to the man so the man would not see his face. When he could speak, he asked the custodian why. He asked it almost angry, because gratitude and shame were the same muscle in him and he had never learned to use one without the other. And the custodian, gathering his cart to go back up, said a thing that Malcolm Reeves would carry for the rest of his life without ever once being able to spend it. He said, "My mama used to tell me, you don't feed a man so he'll remember you. You feed him so he makes it to morning." And then he was gone up the service elevator, and Malcolm never saw his face in good light and never got his name. In the morning, Malcolm made it to the day labor hall on Marietta and got picked for a loading crew, and from that crew he made it to a dispatcher's desk, and from that desk he made it, over 30 years and 10,000 decisions, to the granite over the doors with his name in it. He went back to that downtown building twice in the 80s to find the man. The custodial company had changed hands. Nobody had records. Nobody remembered a young man pushing a cart because nobody ever does. The building itself came down in 1994 to make a parking deck. So Malcolm did the thing that wounded men with money do. He decided he would never again be in a position to need a stranger's cornbread. He built so high that no one could shelter him because no one could reach him. And the gratitude he could not deliver, the thank you with nowhere to land, went sour in him the way anything does that has no exit. And it came out as a philosophy, which is what we call a wound when a rich man has it. He said it in meetings. He said it to his son. He had it, more or less, engraved in his own posture. "Nobody builds a tower on thank yous," he would say. Sentiment is the most expensive thing you can carry, and it doesn't move a single pallet. His executives wrote it down. They thought it was wisdom. It was a man trying to convince himself that the best thing that had ever happened to him had not mattered. Because if it had mattered, then he owed a debt he could never pay, to a man he could never find, and Malcolm Reeves had organized his entire enormous life around the proposition that he did not owe anyone anything. He was, by every external measure, a complete success. He ate dinner alone most nights at a long table in a house with 14 rooms. He kept the heat in that house at 72 degrees year-round, a number he never had to think about, and some nights, for reasons he refused to examine, he would find himself standing in a warm room, remembering the smell of a utility plant and a square of cornbread he had eaten with his back turned, 41 years before, in a building that no longer existed, brought to him by a man whose face he could not picture, and whose name he had never been given. He had walked through the lobby of his own tower at strange hours more than 200 times. He had ridden the elevators late. He had passed, without seeing, a gray cart with one wheel that pulled left, pushed by a man humming a gospel line under his breath. The world is built so that the people who most need to find each other are kept exactly far enough apart to never look up at the same time. In 11 days that was going to change, and the thing that would change it was sitting, that night, empty on a young woman's desk on the 31st floor. Her name was Renee Caldwell, and she was 26, and the cake had been her mother's recipe. She worked in the accounts group on 31, 18 months in, the youngest on the team and the only one of them who came up the way she had come up. Her mother had passed the spring before from a heart that simply wore out at 53, and Renee had her mother's recipe box, a tin one with a faded rooster on the lid, and in it, on an index card in her mother's slanting hand, was the caramel cake her mother had made every birthday of Renee's life. It took 4 hours. It took the good butter and the patience Renee did not always have. The day before her birthday, she had stayed up past midnight in her one-bedroom on Memorial Drive and made it, layer by layer, because turning 26 without her mother was going to be hard, and she had decided to do the hard thing on purpose, the way her mother would have, and bring the cake to work so that her birthday would have other people in it. She wrote her name on the box in marker, Renee. She put it in the 31st floor kitchenette refrigerator at 8:50 in the morning with a note that said, "Please save for 3 p.m. It's my birthday. Help yourselves then." And she went to her desk, happy, in a careful, braced sort of way. At 11:40 there was an all-hands in the big conference room about the quarterly numbers, and it ran long, and somebody had said something about there being cake in the kitchen. And the team, hungry and bored and important, had gone in on the break and eaten it. All of it. Not maliciously, which is the part that would matter later, the part that made it a story about indifference and not about villains. No one set out to wound Renee Caldwell. They simply did not think about her at all. Her name on the box was just a wizard. The note was just a note. They cut the cake she had stayed up until 1 in the morning to build, and they ate it off paper towels standing up. And they said it was good, real good, who brought this, and nobody knew, and the meeting resumed. And by 2:15, the cake was gone and the box was empty, and someone had set the empty box back on Renee's desk, the lid closed as if returning it. She found it at 3 Latho when she came to the kitchen with the candles she had bought, a little box of 7 striped candles. $1.29, because 7 was the number the corner store had, and it didn't matter. You just light a few. She stood in the kitchenette and understood it in pieces, the way you understand bad news in pieces, because the whole of it will not fit through the door at once. The empty refrigerator shelf where the box had been, the crumbs on the counter, the single fork in the sink, rinsed but not washed, the paper towels balled up in the bin with frosting on them, and then her own name in her own marker on the box, set back on her own desk with the lid closed, as though someone had done her the courtesy of returning the packaging. She did the math of it standing there. 4 hours the night. Before the good butter, 4 17.99s, 2 trips to the store because she'd forgotten the cream of tartar. The candles she had bought on her lunch, walking 8 blocks in the heat so the team would have something to gather around at 3 o'clock. So that, turning 26 in a city where her mother was no longer alive, would have, for 10 minutes, the shape of being celebrated. She had not wanted a party. She had wanted the cake to do the thing the cake had always done, which was to put her mother in the room. And they had eaten her mother off paper towels standing up and said it was real good, and asked who brought it, and not waited for the answer. She did not make a scene. This is important. And it is the thing the indifferent never understand about the people they step over. She did not cry where they could see. She closed the box. She put the 7 candles back in her bag. She told the one coworker who noticed her face, a man named Greg who managed to look guilty for about 4 seconds before a meeting carried him off, that it was fine, really. It was just a grocery cake, which was a lie folded inside a lie, and she went back to her desk and answered email. She did not read until the floor emptied out at 6:30. And then she sat a while longer in the dark with the single band of after-hours light running down the center of the carpet, holding the empty box on her lap, sitting straight, because she could not yet make her body get up and carry it to the elevator and ride down past the bright lobby and out into a city, where the one person who would have understood exactly what this cost her had been gone since the spring. It was 9:52 at night when Isaiah Brooks came onto 31 with his cart. He had heard nothing about any of it. He saw a young woman still at her desk 3 hours after the floor should have been empty, sitting very straight the way his own mother used to sit when something had taken everything she had. And she had decided when it would not also take her posture. He saw the box. He had emptied the refrigerator enough since a Crocs fried ice to know what a cake box was, and to know that this one had been somebody's. He did not say anything, because she had not asked him to, and because his whole life had taught him that the kindest thing you can offer a proud person is the chance to not be seen needing it. He went on with his floor. He did the far bins first, giving her time, and when he came back around past her aisle, and he stopped his cart by the kitchenette, out of her sight line, and he took out of the side pocket 2 squares for his wife's cornbread he had carried up that night, wrapped in foil, still good. Della's recipe in his mother's skillet, and he thought for a moment, and then he did the thing his hands had been doing in the dark for 50 years before his mind had any say in it. He opened the empty box on the counter. He set the 2 foil squares inside it where the cake had been. He took the little laminated scripture card from the inside lid of his cart, the dollar card soft at the edges from 11 years of his thumb, the one bit of company he carried through the dark, and after a moment's hesitation, he tucked it under the foil, because a young woman sitting that straight in the dark needed company more than he did tonight, and on the back of a paper towel in block letters, because his hand shook some now. He wrote the only thing he knew to write, the only inheritance he had to give a stranger sitting straight in the dark. You don't have to be full to make it to morning. You just have to eat something. A friend on the night crew. He closed the lid. He set the box, very lightly, near the end of her aisle where she would find it on her way out, and he would already be 2 floors down. He stood perfectly still for a second, his hand on the lid, the way you steady something that you are not sure you have the right to touch. Then he pushed his cart, the one wheel pulling left, to the service elevator, and he rode down into the dark of the sleeping tower, and he did not tell anyone, and he did not leave his name. In the corner of the 31st floor ceiling, a small black dome with a red pinpoint of light recorded all of it, the way it recorded everything, onto a drive, in a room 3 floors underground, that no one ever watched unless something went wrong. For the next several days, the building did what it always did, which was keep 2 men 40 floors and 41 years apart from ever looking up at the same moment. Malcolm Reeves came in at 7:10 most mornings and rode the express elevator to 41. And the lobby he crossed had been mopped to a shine he never registered by a man who had clocked out 90 minutes before. On the Tuesday he came down at 8:40 at night for a file he'd forgotten, and the service elevator opened up across the lobby as he reached the doors, and a gray cart came out, pushed by a man in coveralls, and Malcolm Reeves, 60 years old, owner of all of it, glanced at the motion the way you glance at weather, and looked back at his phone, and walked out into his car. And the distance between them, in that moment, was about 30 feet, and 4 decades, and the whole architecture of a life built so that the second man would never have to be seen. Isaiah, for his part, registered the boss the way the night crew registers all of them, as a fact of the building. A man whose bin on 41 he emptied of espresso pods and torn paper, whose whoppies and he wiped down at 11:20 each night, working around the framed things on the credenza, a photograph of a woman, a model of the first box truck cast in bronze, and a single laminated scripture card, very old, very worn, framed under glass as if it were worth more than anything else in the room. Isaiah had dusted that glass 100 times. He had never once read the verse on the card, because it was not his to read, and because a man cleaning another man's office learns to keep his eyes moving and his thoughts to himself. He could not have known that it was the same verse printed on the dollar card he had carried in his own cart for 11 years. The verse half the churches on the South Side handed out by the 100 at suppers and revivals. The verse a frightened 19-year-old had been handed once, on a winter night in 1985, by a custodian whose face he never saw clearly and whose name he was never given. There are 10,000 such cards moving through the world at any moment, passed hand to hand at bus stops and bedsides, and 2 of them had ended up 40 floors apart in the same tower. One framed under glass on the desk of the man who owned it, one riding in the supply box of the man who cleaned it, and neither man knew the other was there. The building did not know how to tell that story. Buildings never do. They only hold the people who could, and keep them on different floors. Renee Caldwell had taken the box home. She had found it at 6:48 the night Isaiah left it, on her way to the elevator, her own name in her own hand on a lid that should have been empty. And she had opened it expecting nothing, and found 2 squares of cornbread, and a card worn soft as cloth, and a paper towel, with block letters that shook a little at the edges. She had stood in the dark band of the after-hours light and read it twice. She did not know who. She suspected the night crew, the way the paralegal on 33 had suspected, the way you suspect kindness when you have learned not to expect it from the people you can see. She ate 1 square standing right there, because she had not eaten all day, and it was, she would think later, the best thing she had put in her mouth since her mother died. Not because of the cornbread, though the cornbread was good, but because somebody in that building, somebody she had never met and could not name, had looked at an empty box with her name on it and decided that she should not have to make it to morning on nothing. She kept the card. She propped it against her lamp at home. She did not throw away the box. And 11 days after the cake, on a Thursday, an email would go out from the 31st floor manager up the chain about a complaint, and a request to pull the kitchen footage to settle who had taken whose lunch. And the drive, in the room, 3 floors underground, would give up everything it had recorded, including 90 seconds of a man in gray coveralls opening an empty cake box in the dark and putting his own dinner inside it. And that footage would land by a route no one intended, on the one desk in the building where it could do the most damage to the sentence, carved into a man's posture for 41 years. But that had not happened yet. For now there was only a tower full of people who could not see each other, a box that was no longer empty, a card riding home in a young woman's bag, and a man on the night crew, 64 years old, pushing a cart with 1 wheel that pulled left through the dark of the 41st floor, humming low, getting the work done before morning, telling no one his name. Renee Caldwell came back to the 31st floor on a Tuesday at 9:30 at night, 11 days after her birthday, because she could not let it go. She had told herself a dozen reasons. She had left a folder. She wanted to get ahead on the close. But the truth, the one she admitted only on the elevator up, was that she had been carrying the soft little card propped against her lamp at home for 11 days, and the note with the block letters that shook at the edges, and she needed to know whose hand had written it. She had asked around the day shift, careful, casual. Nobody knew anything about the night crew. Nobody had ever thought to ask. He was working the far aisle when she came off the elevator, a tall, older man in gray coveralls, a cart beside him with 1 wheel turned out at an angle, and he straightened when he saw her and gave her the small nod that men who clean buildings give the people who belong to them, the nod that means, I'll stay out of your way. She almost lost her nerve. Then she crossed the floor and stood a respectful few feet off and said, "I think you left something on my desk a couple weeks ago." In a box. He did not lie, but he did not claim it either. He said there were a few of them on the night crew. He said a lot of folks looked out for each other in a building like this, after hours. He said it gently, giving her the out, the way he gave everyone the out. But she had decided on the elevator that she was done being given the out. So she sat down in the empty chair at the desk across from his cart, in the band of after-hours light, and she told a stranger in gray coveralls the things she had not told one single person at her own funeral quiet desk for 11 days. She told him the cake was her mother's recipe. She told him her mother had made it every birthday of her life and had died in the spring at 53 of a heart that just stopped, and that she, Renee, had stayed up until 1 in the morning building it layer by layer so that turning 26 in a city where her mother was gone would have her mother in the room for 10 minutes. She told him about the empty box with her own name on it. She told him she had sat right here in the dark holding it and could not get up, and that when she finally did, on her way out she had found 2 squares of cornbread inside it, and a card worn soft as cloth, and a note that said, "You don't have to be full to make it to morning," and that she had eaten 1 square standing right there at this counter, and it had undone her completely because somebody she had never met had looked at her empty box and decided she should not have to go home on nothing. She said, "I just wanted to say thank you to whoever, that's all." Isaiah Brooks set down his cloth. He did not tell her it was nothing. He did not tell her her mother was watching, or that time would heal it, or any of the things people say to fill a silence they cannot stand. He had buried a wife. He knew that the kindest thing you can do with somebody else's grief is not reach for it. So he just listened all the way to the end, the way his mother had taught him a long time ago, the way you sit with a person so though they are not in a quiet room. And when she was done, he said only that his late wife used to make a cornbread folks would change their route home to drive past, and that he expected her mother's cake had been the same kind of thing, the kind of cooking that is really just a way of saying, "I am still here, eat." And Renee Caldwell, 26, put her face in her hands at a stranger's cart in the dark and let it out, finally, all of it. And the man across from her did not interrupt, and did not fix it, and was simply, completely there. She left a little before 10. At the elevator she turned and asked his name, and he told her, the way you tell someone a small true thing. "Isaiah," he said. "Isaiah Brooks." She said it back to him so she would not lose it. It was the 4th time in 11 years anyone in that building had asked. What neither of them knew was that the missing food complaints had finally caught up with the building 3 days before. For months the day shift kitchens had been generating the small ugly friction of shared refrigerators. Lunches gone, leftovers vanished, the sticky notes getting sharper. On the Friday before Renee came back, an office manager on 26 had escalated it, and building security had been asked to pull a week of kitchenette footage to settle it. A young officer scrubbed through 9 nights at 16 times speed, and what he kept finding on floor after floor was the same thing: the night custodian alone after midnight handling food in the kitchenettes, setting things down, opening containers. On the 31st floor clip, at 9:54 p.m. on the night of the cake, he watched the custodian open a cake box, put something inside it, and set it on a desk. The officer did not understand what he was seeing, because he had been trained to look for the wrong thing. He wrote it up the way the wrong thing reads. Subject appears to be tampering with employee food. Possible source of ongoing theft complaints. Recommend review. The building manager, who had a contract to protect and a complaint to close, attached the clips and forwarded it up with a recommendation to terminate. And, because Reeves Group had a policy its founder had insisted on personally for 30 years, that no employee with 10 or more years in the building could be let go without his signature. The file crossed the desk of Malcolm Reeves on a Thursday morning at 7:40, flagged routine. He almost signed it without watching. He had signed 1,000 such things. But the line in the summary caught him, tampering with employee food, and some old instinct he could not name made him click the 31st floor clip instead. He watched a man in gray coveralls, 60-some years old, push a cart with one bad wheel up to a kitchenette in the dark. He watched the man open a cake box that was sitting empty on the counter. He watched him take 2 foil-wrapped squares out of his own cart and set them gently inside the box where the cake had been. He watched him tuck a small card under the foil and stand a moment, hesitating, before he gave it up, and he watched the man write something on a paper towel in block letters, close the lid, carry the box to the end of an aisle, and stand there with his hand on it, perfectly still. For what the timestamp said was 11 seconds, before he pushed his cart away into the dark. Malcolm Reeves sat in a corner office on the 41st floor of a building with his name over the doors, and he watched it again. And then, a third time. And on the third time, he made the security officer's note pull up the photograph of what the custodian had written, and a tech enhanced it, and the block letters came up gray and shaking on his screen. You don't have to be full to make it to morning. You just have to eat something. A friend on the night crew. The room went very far away. Malcolm Reeves was 19 years old again, in a utility room on a January night in 1985, eating cornbread with his back turned so a stranger would not see his face, and a young custodian was gathering water to go and saying easy, not making a thing of it. My mama used to tell me, you don't feed a man so he'll remember you, you feed him so he makes it to morning. His first thought, wild and certain, was that it was the same man. That after 41 years, the man he had searched for and given up on had been pushing a cart through Malcolm's own tower this whole time. He had the file open in 20 seconds. Isaiah Brooks, 64. 11 years in the building. And there in the employment record, the work history. A hospital, before that a school, before that a warehouse loading floor on the west side. Not a downtown office lobby. Not in 1985. The arithmetic would not close. It was not the same man. It was worse than the same man, and it took Malcolm the rest of that morning to understand why. It was not one man. It had never been one man. The debt he had spent 41 years trying to locate and repay, the single face he had gone back twice to that vanished building to find, was not a single face at all. It was a whole order of people, an invisible night crew of them stretching back and back. Mothers in Macon and Albany, and 100 towns that never made the map, passing the same plain sentence hand to hand the way they passed everything they had. You feed him so he makes it to morning. And one of them had been cleaning Malcolm's own floors for 11 years. One of them had been 30 feet away from him on a Tuesday night. One of them had been making the trouble of other people's lives disappear so completely that Malcolm could believe there had never been any trouble, could keep the heat at 72 and eat alone at a table for 12 and tell his executives that nobody builds a tower on thank yous. He had been wrong in a way that had a body and a name and a wage of $14.85 an hour. And the wrongness had been working the night shift in his building the entire time he was up here being right. The proxy who said it plainly was a 26-year-old accountant. When the manager's office called Renee Caldwell down to ask whether she'd had food taken, because her floor was in the footage, she understood in about 4 seconds what they were building and who they were building it against. And she did the thing the indifferent never expect from the people they step over. She refused to play her part. She said, on the record, that nothing of hers had been stolen. She said the man on that tape had not taken one thing from her, she said. He gave me his own dinner. He found my name on an empty box. He found my name on an empty box so I wouldn't go home with nothing. And if you fire that man for it, you are going to have to do it with me standing in the lobby telling everybody who walks in exactly what kind of building this is. Her statement, 3 sentences of it, went up the same chain the footage had, and reached the 41st floor by the middle of the afternoon. And Malcolm Reeves read it, standing at his window, 60 years old, with the city laid out below him that he had spent his whole life climbing above. He put his hand over his mouth. He had not cried since he was 19 years old in a utility room with his back to a stranger. He had organized 41 years precisely so that he would never have to. He cried now, not loud. He stood at the glass with the lights of Atlanta coming on below him, and his shoulders went. And the sentence he had carried like a load-bearing wall, "Nobody builds a tower on thank yous," came down quietly inside him, because he was standing in a tower he had built on exactly one thank you he had never been allowed to say. And the not saying had cost him everyone he had ever pushed away in its name. He thought about his wife, who had told him in 2009 that he treated the people closest to him like vendors, and how he had heard it as an insult instead of a diagnosis. He thought about his son in Los Angeles and the 4 phone calls a year, and how he had taught the boy, without once meaning to, that affection was a kind of weakness in the supply chain. He thought about every executive who had written down his sentence about thank yous like it was wisdom, and how he had been recruiting people his whole life to help him stay wrong. He had taken the best thing that ever happened to him, a stranger's hand on a cold night, and he had spent 4 decades arguing with it, because to accept it was to owe, and to owe was to need, and a boy who had buried his mother at 17 had decided on a Greyhound bus that he would die before he needed anyone again. He had gotten his wish. He had needed no one. He was 60 years old, and he ate at a table set for 12, alone, and the heat was always 72. He stayed at the window a long time. Then he wiped his face with the flat of his hand the way his mother used to, and he went and found the building's night schedule, and he saw that the man came on at 9:40. At 11 p.m. that night, the service elevator opened on the 41st floor, and Malcolm Reeves was standing in the dark waiting for it. Isaiah Brooks had cleaned a great many offices for a great many men, and he knew the difference between a man who comes to give you trouble and a man who comes carrying something he cannot put down. The man at the elevator was the second kind. Isaiah set the brake on his cart. "I'm Malcolm Reeves," the man said, which Isaiah already knew, and then he seemed to run out of the script that name usually came with. He said he had seen the footage. He said he knew about the box. And then, because he had spent 41 years building walls and did not have a good way to do this, he simply told the custodian the truth, all of it, the Greyhound and the $31 and the utility room and the cornbread eaten with his back turned and the sentence about mourning he had carried ever since and never once been able to repay. He told a man he had met 90 seconds ago the thing he had told no living soul in 4 decades. The night floor was the safe stranger now. They had traded places without either of them deciding to. When he was done, he said, "I have been looking for that man my whole life. And I think now there were always a lot of him. And one of him has been working in my building for 11 years, and I never once saw his face." He took an envelope from his coat. He said, "I would like to make this right." And he held out a check, because it was the only language a man like Malcolm Reeves had ever learned for the size of what he felt. Isaiah Brooks looked at the envelope. He did not reach for it. He said, "I appreciate that. I do. But I didn't put that food in that girl's box so it would come back to me." He said, "My mama raised me on that. You don't feed somebody to be paid for it. You feed them so they make the morning, and then the morning's the whole of it." He said it kindly, with no edge, a man explaining the only economy he had ever believed in to a man who had grown rich is never believing it. "I can't take what I haven't earned," he said. "It'd spoil the one thing I've got that's worth anything." Malcolm tried once more, because trying once more was the only muscle he had ever trusted. He said the check would change the man's life. He said the man had a granddaughter. He had read the file, the daughter working doubles in East Point. He said, "Let me at least do it for the child, if you won't do it for yourself," and he meant it as kindness. And he watched it land wrong. Isaiah did not get angry. He just looked at the envelope a long moment, and then at the man holding it, with some it was almost tenderness, as the way you look at someone who is trying very hard in a language they were never taught. He said, "You want to take care of my grandbaby. You don't do it by handing me a number," he said. "You do it by making the world she's growing up in one where a man can clean a building 11 years and have folks know his name." He said his daughter did not need rescuing. She needed the night shift she already worked to pay what an honest night's work was worth. He said, "You keep that. And when you figure out what to do with it, do it for 9 people, not for 1. That's the only version of this I can take a part in." Malcolm stood holding the envelope in the dark, and for the first time in his adult life, he understood that there were things his money was the wrong shape to buy. He put it away. And then, because he was a man who had built a logistics empire out of asking the right question, after he'd asked all the wrong ones, he asked a different one. He said, "Then what would you do? If it were yours to decide. You've cleaned this building 11 years. You know it at night the way nobody up here ever will. What needs doing?" And Isaiah Brooks, who had never once in 11 years been asked what he thought needed doing, was quiet for a moment. Then he told him. He said there were 9 people on the night crew, and not one of them made enough to take the bus both ways and eat the same day. So they walked, some of them, 40 minutes after midnight in February. He said the woman on his crew who did the lobby had a boy with asthma and missed work she couldn't afford every time the inhaler ran out. He said Dante at the front desk was 3 classes from his GED and could test out by spring if somebody covered the fee. He said nobody up here knew a single one of their names and that he did not want to check, but that a man with a building this size could, if he had a mind to, make it so. The people who kept it clean did not have to choose between the fare and their supper. That was all. That was the whole of what he asked for, and he asked for none of it for himself. Malcolm Reeves listened the way he had not listened in 41 years. And the next morning he did not write a check. He did something that cost him more because it required him to be seen doing it. By the end of the quarter, the night crew wage in the Reeves Tower had gone to $21.50 an hour, and the same floor was set for every building the company held. There was a fund run out of the company and seeded by Malcolm himself that any night shift worker in the building could draw on without a form or a reason for an inhaler, a bus pass, a test fee, a month's rent in a bad month, and it was not named after Malcolm Reeves. At Isaiah's asking, it carried the name of a woman from Macon nobody in that tower had ever heard of. Isaiah's mother, who had come up in 1962 with 2 suitcases and a cast-iron skillet wrapped in a church dress, and fed porch dress 4 children on the wages of a city that never learned to spell her name. The plaque by the night crew break room, a room that had not existed before, and now had a microwave and a real table and chairs, said only her name and one line under it. "You feed him so he makes it to morning." Dante passed his GED in March and started at the community college in the fall on the fund, and he was studying to be a building engineer. Because, he said, he wanted to run a place like this one day and make sure the people who worked it after dark had their names on a list somewhere. Renee Caldwell transferred nothing, asked for nothing. But she started coming in some evenings at 9:40 on purpose, and she would bring 2 cups of coffee to the 31st floor and sit a while at the cart. And she and Isaiah talked the way people do who have agreed, without saying so, to keep each other company in a building that goes quiet at night. On her next birthday, she made her mother's caramel cake again, 4 layers, 4 hours, and she brought it to the night crew break room at 10 p.m., and she cut it into pieces and set it on the real table under the plaque. And 9 people who had worked 11 years in that tower, without a place to sit down, ate cake together in the middle of the night, and laughed loud enough that the sound carried down the empty hall. The empty cake box, the $3.99 box with Ren E in her own marker on the lid, did not get thrown away. Malcolm asked her for it. He had it framed the way he had once framed a worn dollar card from a church table, and he hung it on the wall of the 41st floor lobby where 200 people a day cross the marble without looking down at eye level, where they would have to see it. There was no plaque under that one. He said the box could say it better than he could. Most people walked past it. But every so often somebody stopped and read the name and understood that an empty box had been hung in a place of honor in a tower worth a fortune, and stood there a moment trying to work out why. And that was exactly the moment Malcolm Reeves had built the whole wall to create. He came down to the night floor most Thursdays after that at 11, and he did not bring checks. He brought 2 coffees like Renee, and sometimes he brought his granddaughter's drawings to show, because his son had brought the boy Bo back into his life that spring, and he and Isaiah Brooks would stand at the cart in the band of After Hours, Light and Talk. 2 men who had come up from the same red Georgia clay by different roads, one who had spent his life learning how to be seen, and one who had spent his learning how not to need to be. Each of them, at 60 and 64, finally getting an education in the other man's subject. Tia met Malcolm once on a Saturday and asked him the question she asked everyone, which was whether he knew her granddaddy brought food to people, who Malcolm told her yes. He told her he was one of them. If this story puts someone in your mind, somebody you walk past who keeps the lights working and the floors clean and your morning easier than you ever stop to notice, somebody whose name you have never thought to learn, send this to them, or better, learn the name. And here is the question worth sitting with tonight. Malcolm Reeves spent 41 years trying to repay one man, and never could, because the man was gone, and the building was gone, and the debt had no address. When he finally paid it, he paid it forward to a stranger, into a fund with another woman's name on it. So tell me what you think, and be honest. Is a kindness ever really repaid, or does the best we can do is keep it moving and hand it down the line to whoever comes in last and hungry on a cold night, the way it was handed to us? Leave your answer below. I read them. There's a line in tonight's story I keep coming back to. I'm still not sure I got it right. It's the thing Isaiah's mother taught him. The thing he hands a stranger in the dark with no name on it. You don't feed a man so he'll remember you. I keep feed him so about the second half. The second half. The first part is easy. The second part is the one that costs you something. It's the kindness you keep doing after nobody is counting. I'll be honest. I almost wrote it so the rich man finds the exact stranger he owed. I didn't. I don't think it works that way. I think the debt was never to one person. If you're hearing this past midnight, after a shift nobody clocked, I wrote it for you. Maybe you took the late bus home alone tonight. Maybe you cleaned a building that will never learn your name. The line is for you. I'll be back next week with another story about someone the world keeps walking past. Isaiah and Malcolm aren't real. Neither is the tower, but the line is real, and it's the one I want you to carry out of here tonight. You don't feed a man so he'll remember you. You feed him so he makes it to morning.